The rain came down in sheets, slapping against the fogged windows of Moonlight Diner, a small roadside joint tucked off a New York highway. Neon green light flickered from a sign above its glow, bleeding into the puddles on the asphalt, painting the night in hues of electric melancholy. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and fried onions, the kind of scent that clung to clothes long after you left. Stainless steel tables gleamed dully under fluorescent bulbs, their cold surfaces reflecting the sparse crowd, a trucker nursing a burger, a couple whispering in a booth, and James Carter seated alone in the corner. James, 36, was a black man, whose broad shoulders and steady gaze carried the weight of a life shaped by discipline and loss. A former Marine, he'd traded combat boots for work boots, spending days hauling bricks on construction sites and nights pulling security shifts. His hands calloused and scarred, wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu. He sipped slowly, not because he savored it, but because it gave him a reason to linger before his next shift. His daughter Lily, 7 years old, was at home with a neighbor, likely asleep under a quilt stitched by her late mother. Everything James did, every extra hour, every skipped meal, was for her. His dark eyes scanned the diner, taking in the rhythm of the place, the clink of dishes, the hum of a jukebox playing a forgotten country tune, the soft shuffle of the waitress's sneakers. Eleanor Hayes moved through the diner with a quiet grace that didn't quite match her faded apron or the ponytail pulling her blonde hair taut. At 26, she was tall, her movements deliberate, her blue eyes sharp with an alertness that felt out of place in a late-night shift. Customers saw a server. They didn't see the daughter of Raymond Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovations, a tech empire that dominated the Northeast. Eleanor had walked away from boardrooms and trust funds to live what she called a real-life trading penthouses for a rented studio, and a job that paid in tips and sore feet. She hid her past, but her poise betrayed a mind that never stopped calculating. She refilled the trucker's water, her lips curving in a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. James watched her not with interest, but with the instinct of someone who'd learned to read a room. He noticed the way she scanned the door each time it opened, as if expecting trouble. He noticed the faint tension in her jaw when a customer lingered too long at the counter. He didn't know her story, but he recognized the look of someone carrying a weight they didn't share. The door swung open, letting in a gust of wet air and 3 men. The leader, Robert Langley, strode in like he owned the place, his tailored coat dripping onto the linoleum. His 2 assistants followed, their faces blank, but their postures alert. Robert's presence shifted the diner's air, his cologne sharp and expensive, cut through the greasy warmth. He was white, late 40s, with a smile that didn't match the cold glint in his eyes. Eleanor froze for a fraction of a second, her hand tightening around a coffee pot. James caught it, the flicker of recognition, the subtle stiffening of her spine. Robert slid into a booth, his assistants standing nearby like sentinels. "Eleanor," he called, voice smooth but laced with mockery. "Didn't expect to see you slumming it tonight." Her smile tightened, but she approached, notepad ready. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice steady. Robert leaned forward, his gaze raking over her. "Oh, come on, princess. Drop the act. We both know you're not cut out for this." He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to make her flinch. The diner went quiet, the trucker looking down at his plate, the couple hunching closer together. James's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. He crossed the room in 4 strides, his work boots heavy but controlled. "Let her go," he said, voice low, the kind of calm that carried a warning. Robert's eyes flicked to him, sizing him up with a smirk. "This doesn't concern you, friend." James didn't blink. When a man puts his hands on a woman who doesn't want it, it concerns everyone. Robert laughed a sharp, dismissive sound and nodded to one of his assistants. The man, broad and heavy, stepped forward, fists clenched. James didn't hesitate. Years of training kicked in. He sidestepped a clumsy swing, grabbed the assistant's arm, and twisted it just enough to drop him to his knees. The second assistant moved, but James's glare stopped him cold. No blood, no bruises, just a quiet show of strength that left the diner breathless. Robert released Eleanor's wrist, his face darkening. "You'll regret this," he spat. "I'll have the cops here in 10 minutes. You'll never work again." James met his gaze unflinching. "Do what you have to." Eleanor stood, frozen, her breath shallow, her eyes darting between James and Robert. The businessman stormed out, his assistants scrambling after him, the door slamming shut behind them. James turned to Eleanor, his expression softening just enough to notice. You okay?" She nodded, but her hands trembled as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod, picked up his jacket, and walked into the rain, his silhouette fading into the night. Eleanor watched him go, her heart pounding with something she couldn't name: gratitude, fear, or the faint stir of something deeper. Outside, the neon sign flickered, and the rain kept falling as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. The morning after the diner incident broke over James Carter's life like a storm cloud refusing to lift. His phone buzzed at dawn, not with work offers, but with a notification, a grainy video circulating online, clipped and distorted, showing him pinning Robert Langley's assistant to the floor. The caption read, "Violent black ex-Marine attacks businessman's security." Comments piled up, each one sharper than the last words, like, "Thug unstable typical." By noon, the security firm called. "We're letting you go," the supervisor said, voice clipped. Too much heat. Construction sites followed one by one, citing reputation concerns. James stood in his small Brooklyn apartment, staring at the cracked screen of his phone, the weight of the world pressing against his ribs. The apartment was modest but clean, its walls adorned with Lily's crayon drawings, James as a superhero cape flapping smile wide. At 36, he didn't feel heroic. He felt like a man running out of ground to stand on. Lily Seven sat at the kitchen table, her braid swinging as she colored a new picture. "Daddy, why aren't you eating?" she asked, her brown eyes too perceptive for her age. James forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "Just thinking, kiddo." He didn't tell her about the whispers at her school, the parents who now eyed him like a problem waiting to happen. He didn't tell her how the world had decided without asking that a black single father couldn't be trusted. Across town, Eleanor Hayes sat in a dimly lit coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug she hadn't touched. The video had reached her too, sent by a co-worker at Moonlight Diner with a single word: trouble. She recognized the scene instantly the moment James had stepped in, his voice steady, his strength undeniable. Guilt twisted in her chest, sharp as a blade. She was the reason he was in this mess, and she wasn't about to let it bury him. She dialed Olivia Brooks, a lawyer she'd met through a charity event. Olivia, a black woman in her 40s, had raised a son alone while fighting for veterans and workers like James. "I need your help," Eleanor said, voice low. "A man's life is being ruined because of me." Olivia agreed to meet at James's apartment that evening. When Eleanor arrived, she carried a paper bag of sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, an offering that felt small against the chaos she'd caused. James opened the door, his expression guarded but not unkind. "You didn't have to come," he said, stepping aside. The apartment smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh laundry, a testament to his effort to keep things steady for Lily, who peeked from the hallway, curious. Eleanor set the bag on the counter, her fingers brushing the edge of a drawing. "I did," she said. "This is my fault." They sat at the table Lily sent to bed with a story. Olivia laid out a plan: find witnesses from the diner, dig into Robert Langley's history of harassment, build a case to counter the smear campaign. Robert, she warned, had deep pockets and deeper connections. His team was already spinning the narrative, painting James as a volatile ex-soldier with PTSD. "He's not just coming for you," Olivia said, her gaze steady. "He's using you to hurt Eleanor." James leaned back, his jaw tight. "I don't take handouts," he said. "If I stay quiet just to save my skin, what kind of man am I?" To Lily, Eleanor's throat tightened. She saw the pride in his eyes, the same pride that had made him stand up in the diner. "You're the kind of man who doesn't deserve this," she said. For the first time, James let his guard slip just enough to share a piece of himself. He spoke of the war, shrapnel scars hidden under his shirt nights. He still woke to the sound of gunfire. He spoke of his wife taken by cancer 3 years ago, leaving him to raise Lily in a world that judged him before he opened his mouth. "I've been through worse," he said, voice low, "but I won't let them take my daughter's faith in me." Eleanor hesitated, then shared her own truth, a life of privilege. She'd rejected a father who saw her as a chess piece, a world where trust was a currency she couldn't afford. "I came to the diner to find something real," she said, "and I found you." The words hung between them, fragile but heavy. James didn't respond, but his eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing through the quiet. As Eleanor and Olivia left the city, hummed outside its lights, indifferent to the battle ahead. James stood at the door, watching them go, his hand resting on the frame. He didn't know if they could win, but for the first time in days he felt a spark of something, hope maybe, or the stubborn will to fight. In the darkness of his apartment, Lily's drawings glowed faintly under the lamplight, a reminder of why he couldn't give up. The air in James Carter's apartment felt heavier each day, as if the walls themselves absorbed the weight of the world outside. A week after the video smeared his name, the harassment began. Anonymous texts lit up his phone at odd hours. Stay quiet or else. A stranger snapped photos of him and Lily at the school gate, the camera's click sharp as a gunshot in his ears. The online vitriol grew uglier, painting him as a PTSD-riddled thug who'd attacked an innocent businessman. Social media split, some defended him, but most swallowed Robert Langley's narrative: a poor black father couldn't possibly protect a billionaire's daughter without an agenda. James stood at his kitchen counter, gripping a mug until his knuckles paled, wondering how truth could feel so fragile. Across the city, Eleanor Hayes sat in Olivia Brooks's cramped law office, the desk buried under case files and coffee stains. The lawyer's eyes, fierce but kind, scanned a witness list from Moonlight Diner. "We're close," Olivia said, tapping a name. Daniel Torres, ex-cop turned truck driver, was there that night. He saw everything. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. She hadn't slept properly since the video dropped, haunted by the image of James's steady gaze crumbling under the world's judgment. She'd caused this, and she'd fix it no matter the cost. "Can we trust him?" she asked. Olivia's smile was grim. "He's been dodging Robert's threats. If we convince him he's our key." James faced his own battles. Robert's legal team escalated, leaking medical records, falsified but convincing, claiming James's war injuries left him unstable. The accusations stung worse than the shrapnel scars hidden under his shirt. He took Lily to school each morning, her small hand in his, her chatter about superheroes a lifeline. But the whispers followed, parents pulling their kids away, teachers watching him too closely. One night, a brick shattered his window glass, scattering across Lily's drawings. He swept it up before she woke, his hands shaking, not with fear, but with a quiet, burning resolve. He wouldn't break, not for Robert, not for anyone. Eleanor and Olivia tracked Daniel Torres to a truck stop outside Albany. The man, mid-40s Latino with a weathered face and cautious eyes, sat in a diner booth, nursing a soda. "I saw what happened," he admitted, voice low. Langley grabbed her. "You stepped in. Clean, no nonsense." But fear flickered in his gaze. Robert's men had visited his home, warning him to stay silent. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice steady. "If you don't speak, they win. Not just against James, but against every woman Langley's hurt." Daniel's fingers tightened around his glass. After a long silence, he nodded. "I'm in." The fight gained ground. Olivia uncovered 3 women, former employees of Robert's companies, who'd faced his harassment. Their stories mirrored Eleanor's: grabbed wrists, veiled threats, careers ruined when they spoke out. They agreed to testify, their voices trembling but firm. The tide was turning, but Robert struck back. A new video surfaced, splicing James's words from the diner into a threat. "I'll make you regret this." It went viral, fueling headlines that screamed, "Dangerous veteran targets tycoon." James watched the news in his apartment, the TV's glow casting shadows on Lily's sleeping form. He turned it off, his chest tight, and whispered to the dark, "I'm still here." Eleanor refused to falter. She worked late with Olivia, sifting through diner receipts and security logs, chasing a lead on a hidden camera that might hold the unedited truth. Their breakthrough came when a former diner cook mentioned an old surveillance system, its footage stored in a basement hard drive. "It's a long shot," Olivia warned, but Eleanor's eyes burned with determination. She thought of James, of Lily's drawings, of the man who'd risked everything for her without asking for a dime. Meanwhile, Raymond Hayes, Eleanor's father, summoned her to his Manhattan penthouse. The tech mogul, stern and silver-haired, had dismissed James as a troublemaker chasing his daughter's wealth. But Eleanor's defiance, her refusal to back down, prompted him to dig deeper. He hired investigators, uncovering Robert's history of lawsuits buried by payoffs. Raymond met James at a neutral coffee shop, the air thick with skepticism. "Why didn't you take a deal?" he asked, studying James's worn jacket and steady gaze. James didn't flinch. "Because my daughter needs a father she can respect, not a man who bends for money." Raymond's expression shifted a crack in his armor. He didn't apologize, but he offered resources, access to his legal team, his influence. James accepted not for himself, but for the truth. The battle reached its peak as Olivia secured the diner's hard drive. She and Eleanor huddled in a tech lab watching grainy footage load. The screen flickered, then cleared, showing Robert's hand on Eleanor's wrist. James's calm intervention, the assistant's failed attack. It was undeniable. "This changes everything," Olivia said, her voice shaking with hope. Eleanor exhaled relief, flooding her like warmth after a long winter. She thought of James, of his quiet strength, and knew they were close to justice. James stood outside his apartment staring at the city's lights, his breath fogging in the cold. He didn't know about the footage yet, but he felt a shift like the air before a storm breaks. Lily slept inside her latest drawing, a superhero with his face taped to the fridge. He touched the doorframe, grounding himself. The fight wasn't over, but he wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere out there, Eleanor and Olivia were carrying the same fire, and for the first time James let himself believe they might win. The grand hall of Hayes Innovations gleamed under crystal chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the glow of 1,000 camera flashes. New York's elite filled the space tech moguls, journalists, politicians gathered for the company's annual gala. James Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, his borrowed suit stiff against his shoulders, feeling like a stranger in a world of tailored elegance. His dark eyes scanned the room, landing on Eleanor Hayes, who stood near the stage, her blonde hair catching the light like a beacon. She wore a navy dress, simple but commanding, her posture straight despite the weight of the night. Beside her, Raymond Hayes, her father, adjusted his cufflinks, his face a mask of calculated calm. Tonight wasn't just a gala, it was a reckoning. James had arrived at Raymond's insistence, though he'd rather be home with Lily helping her with math homework. The hard drive from Moonlight Diner, secured by Eleanor and Olivia Brooks, held the truth, a truth they were about to unveil. James's chest tightened as he recalled the footage, Robert Langley's hand on Eleanor's wrist, his own intervention, the assistant's failed attack. It was raw, unedited, undeniable. Olivia stood nearby, her sharp gaze tracking the crowd, her briefcase holding affidavits from 3 women who'd faced Robert's harassment. The stage was set, but James felt the air hum with risk, like the moment before a grenade pin drops. Raymond took the podium, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we celebrate, there's a matter of justice to address." The room stilled, cameras pivoting. He nodded to a technician, and a screen descended, flickering to life. The diner footage played grainy but clear. Gasps rippled as Robert's aggression unfolded, followed by James's calm, precise response. The video ended and silence gripped the hall, heavy as stone. Raymond's voice returned, steady but fierce. "This man, James Carter, protected my daughter when no one else did. He was slandered, harassed, and judged. Tonight we set the record straight." Eleanor stepped forward, her breath shallow but her eyes blazing. "James Carter didn't act for fame or money," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "He acted because it was right. That's the kind of courage we need in this world." She paused, meeting James's gaze across the crowd, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. The room erupted in applause, but James barely heard it. His thoughts were with Lily, with the scars he carried, with the man he'd fought to remain. Police entered discreetly, their badges glinting as they approached Robert Langley, who stood frozen near a champagne table. "You're under arrest for assault, harassment, and defamation," an officer said, cuffs clicking. Robert's face twisted in fury, his protests drowned by the crowd's murmurs. Reporters scrambled, phones buzzing with breaking news. James watched, his jaw tight, not with triumph, but with relief. The weight that had pressed against him for weeks began to lift like clouds parting after a storm. Raymond approached James, extending a hand. "I misjudged you," he said, his voice low. "I'm sorry." James shook his hand, his grip firm. "Just keep her safe," he replied, nodding toward Eleanor. Raymond's eyes softened, a rare crack in his stoic facade. He stepped back as Eleanor joined them, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "You didn't have to be here," she said to James, "but you came." He shrugged, a faint smile breaking through. "Couldn't let you face this alone." The gala continued, but the mood had shifted, less polished, more human. Hayes Innovations announced the Safe Workplace Initiative, a fund to combat harassment and support workers like James. Olivia was named legal advisor, Eleanor its director, and James, to his surprise, was offered the role of chief of security. "You've earned it," Raymond said. James hesitated, then accepted, not for the title, but for the chance to protect others. The crowd dispersed, leaving James and Eleanor near the stage, the chandeliers dimming above. "You changed everything tonight," Eleanor said, her voice soft. James shook his head. "You and Olivia did the heavy lifting. I just stood my ground." She smiled, a real smile, unguarded and warm. "That's enough." They stood in silence, the city's skyline glittering through the windows, a world that felt less hostile than it had days ago. James thought of Lily, of her drawings, of the life he could now rebuild. Eleanor thought of the diner, of the man who'd seen her as more than a name. As they left the hall, James's phone buzzed a photo from his neighbor showing Lily asleep, with a new drawing, James, Eleanor, and her hand in hand. He showed it to Eleanor, who laughed softly, her breath fogging in the cool night air. "She's got a good eye," she said. James nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The truth was out, and with it, a door to something new had opened. The late summer sun dipped low over Brooklyn's Prospect Park, casting golden streaks across the grass where James Carter pushed a bicycle, its training wheels wobbling under Lily's determined pedaling. At 36, James moved with a quieter ease now, the tension that once lined his shoulders softened by months of steady work. His role as chief of security for the Safe Workplace Initiative gave him purpose and time. Time to be the father Lily deserved, to mend the cracks the world had tried to carve into their lives. The park hummed with life, children shrieking on swings, couples sharing ice cream, the distant strum of a busker's guitar. James breathed it in the air, sweet with cut grass and possibility. Eleanor Hayes walked beside him, her blonde hair loose, catching the light like a halo. Gone were the stiff aprons of Moonlight Diner. She wore a simple sundress, her steps light as she laughed at Lily's wobbly turns. As director of the initiative, Eleanor had found her calling not in her father's boardrooms, but in advocating for workers, veterans, and survivors. She no longer needed the weight of her last name to feel whole. With James and Olivia Brooks, she'd built a team that turned pain into progress, their fund already changing lives across the city. Lily Seven pedaled ahead, her braid bouncing. "Look, Daddy, I'm fast," she called, her voice bright as the sun. James grinned, jogging to keep up. "You're a rocket, kiddo." Eleanor clapped, her smile wide, unguarded. They stopped by a picnic table, spreading out a checkered blanket and unpacking sandwiches, peanut butter for Lily, turkey for James and Eleanor. The simplicity of it, the ordinariness, felt like a gift. Months ago, James had faced whispers and threats, his name dragged through the mud. Now neighbors nodded with respect, and Lily's teachers spoke of him with warmth. He wasn't a hero, just a man who'd stood his ground, and that was enough. Eleanor watched Lily chase a butterfly, her eyes soft. "She's incredible," she said, her voice low. James nodded, his gaze following his daughter. "She's my world." He paused, then turned to Eleanor, his expression open in a way it hadn't been before. "You've been good to her. To us." Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "You made it easy," she said. Their hands brushed on the blanket, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of shared battles and quiet hopes. As the sun sank, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lily ran back, plopping between them. She held a dandelion, its seeds trembling in the breeze. "Make a wish," she demanded, thrusting it at Eleanor. Eleanor laughed, closing her eyes before blowing gently, seeds scattering like tiny promises. Lily turned to James. "Your turn, Daddy." He took the dandelion, his calloused fingers gentle, and looked at Lily, then Eleanor. He didn't need to wish. Everything he needed was here. He blew anyway for Lily's sake, and she giggled, wrapping her arms around them both. "I want us to stay like this," she said, her voice small but certain. "Like a family." James's throat tightened, his eyes, meeting Eleanor's over Lily's head. Something unspoken passed between them, not a promise, not yet, but a possibility, fragile and real. Eleanor squeezed Lily's shoulder, her voice soft. "That's a good wish." They sat there, the three of them, as the park quieted and the first stars appeared. The city stretched beyond its lights, no longer cold, but warm like beacons guiding them home. James tucked Lily into bed that night, her latest drawing a park scene with 3 figures taped to the wall. Eleanor waited in the living room, her presence a steady comfort. He joined her, the silence between them, easy earned. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "for fighting with me." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for letting me." Outside, the city hummed, but in that small apartment James felt a peace he'd never known, a happiness built not on glory, but on truth, courage, and the people who mattered most.